The neon lights of the intergalactic bar flickered against the haze of smoke and chatter that filled the room. It was a melting pot of alien species from distant worlds, each one more exotic and imposing than the last. And behind the counter, quietly polishing a glass, stood the bartender. He was human, a rarity in this part of the galaxy, especially one working such a lowly job. His name was unimportant to the patrons, who barely glanced at him when ordering their drinks. To them, he was nothing more than an anomaly, a lesser species that had somehow survived the vast expanses of the universe. He moved with a calm, almost deliberate slowness, which the aliens interpreted as weakness or ineptitude. They sneered when they caught his gaze, amused at the thought of a human serving them. Humans, after all, were considered fragile, a species more suited for menial tasks than real contributions to galactic society. "Hey, human!" a gruff voice called out, cutting through the din. A towering creature with 4 arms and a face covered in thick, leathery skin leaned over the counter. His eyes glowed a dull red, and his mouth twisted into what passed for a grin. "Another round of blood wine for the table. And try not to spill it this time." The bartender nodded without a word and turned to fetch the bottle from behind the counter. His movements were smooth, practiced. He had been working here for months now, long enough to become a fixture but not long enough for anyone to care about his past. The patrons certainly didn't. To them, he was just another nameless servant, someone to be mocked or ignored. As he placed the drinks on the table, another alien, smaller but more boisterous, snickered. "Tell me, human, how do your kind even survive in the galaxy? No claws, no fangs, no natural armor. Pathetic, really." The group laughed, and the bartender gave a slight smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He straightened, his shoulders relaxed, and walked back to the bar without offering a retort. The aliens didn't notice the way his hands never shook, or how his footsteps were unnaturally quiet on the metal floor. They didn't care. To them, he was just another docile, subservient human. The conversation among the aliens shifted, growing louder and more boastful with each drink. They spoke of wars fought across distant stars, of battles where their kind had triumphed over weaker species. The larger alien who had ordered the drinks was the loudest of them all, recounting in exaggerated detail how he had crushed an entire squadron of mercenaries single-handedly. And then, the alien roared, slamming one of his 4 fists on the table. "They begged for mercy. Of course I showed none. Not to weaklings like them." His eyes flicked to the bartender, who was silently wiping down the counter a few feet away. "I bet even you've never seen a battlefield, huh? They'd rip you apart before you could even reach for a weapon." The bartender paused, then resumed his task. "I've seen enough," he said quietly, but the remark was lost amid the laughter of the aliens. "What would you know of battle, human?" another voice jeered. "Your kind is barely suited for space travel, let alone war." The bartender didn't respond. He continued to clean the same spot on the counter, his mind elsewhere. There had been a time when he would have answered, when the very mention of combat would have stirred something inside him. But that time had passed. Now, he preferred the quiet. He had left that life behind, or so he told himself. The larger alien wasn't satisfied with silence. He stood, towering over the bartender. His breath smelled like rancid meat and blood wine as he leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Tell me, human, do you know what it's like to have your enemies tremble at the mere sight of you? To feel their fear before you crush them?" The bartender met his gaze, expression calm. "Fear is a powerful thing," he said evenly, "but it's a poor substitute for respect." The alien blinked, surprised by the answer. For a moment, the room seemed to still, the noise of the bar fading as the other patrons turned their attention to the interaction. But then the alien barked out a harsh laugh. "Respect? From you? I don't need respect from someone who's never been in a real fight." The bartender's hand gripped the edge of the counter, but his face remained neutral. He could feel the eyes on him now, the other patrons watching, waiting to see if he would react. But he didn't. Instead, he released the counter and straightened, brushing off the alien's comment like one might brush dust from their clothes. Without another word, he returned to his work. The aliens, satisfied with their taunts, turned back to their conversation, the tension in the room dissipating as quickly as it had built. The bartender, however, could feel the weight of the encounter lingering in the air. He knew these types, warriors who thrived on dominance, always searching for the next display of power. They had no idea who they were provoking, and that was for the best. For now. The evening wore on, with more drinks poured and more laughter echoing through the bar. The bartender remained a background figure, quietly efficient, his presence almost forgotten by the rowdy patrons. But underneath the surface, a different story was being told. Each insult, each boast, was like a small ember added to a long dormant fire. The bartender had walked away from war, but war never truly leaves a soldier. It follows, waiting for the right moment to resurface. As the night came to a close, the bar began to empty. The larger alien, now thoroughly drunk, staggered toward the door, casting one last glance at the bartender. "You should consider yourself lucky, human," he slurred. "Not everyone gets to serve real warriors." The bartender watched him leave, his expression unreadable. When the last patron had finally stumbled out into the night, the bartender locked the door behind them and let out a slow breath. The bar was quiet again, but the quiet felt different now, heavier somehow. He stood there for a moment, staring at the empty room, his mind drifting back to memories he had tried so hard to bury. One day, he thought, they'll know. But not tonight. Tonight, he was just a bartender. For now. The clamor of the bar faded, replaced by the echoes of battles long past. In the quiet of the empty room, the bartender's thoughts drifted back to a time when he had been known by another name. A name that struck fear into the hearts of enemies across the galaxy. Before he was a bartender, he was a soldier, a legend. His real name was Michael Caine, though few remembered that now. To most, he had been called the Ghost of Earth, a title earned not from flashy bravado but from his deadly efficiency. He had been the best of them all, a soldier who moved like a shadow and killed with the precision of a machine. And he had left that life behind for a reason. The flashback began, the scene sharpening in his mind as if it had just happened yesterday. He was back in the midst of Earth's final war for survival, a war that had changed the course of the galaxy. Caine had been part of Earth's elite special forces, trained to face threats that no other unit could handle. At the height of the intergalactic conflict, the aliens had underestimated humanity. They had seen Earth as a backwater planet, filled with a primitive species that wouldn't last a day in real combat. But they hadn't counted on soldiers like Caine. His first mission that earned him renown was on the battlefield of Proxima 7. It had been an inhospitable moon, the surface scarred by endless craters from previous skirmishes. The mission was simple: lead a team of commandos behind enemy lines, disrupt their supply routes, and cripple their operations. But the simplicity of the mission belied the complexity of the danger. The enemy was a coalition of hardened alien warriors, far larger in number and better equipped. They had sent entire battalions to wipe out the humans, until Caine arrived. He and his men moved like wraiths through the craters and ruins. Caine, in particular, had a way of appearing where the enemy least expected him. His tactics were unconventional, calculated yet unpredictable, blending human ingenuity with the ruthlessness of a seasoned predator. One night, in the thick of combat, Caine's unit had been pinned down by enemy snipers and heavy artillery. The situation had seemed hopeless. The alien coalition commander had even taunted them over open comms, offering surrender in exchange for their lives. Caine had responded with a single word: no. With darkness as his ally, Caine had vanished into the night. Moving silently through enemy lines, he had eliminated their sentries one by one, his combat knife flashing in the pale light of Proxima's twin moons. By dawn, the entire alien encampment lay in ruins. Bodies of elite warriors, who had boasted of their strength, lay cold on the battlefield. Caine had single-handedly dismantled their forces, killing their commander in hand-to-hand combat. Word spread quickly. The humans had a ghost among them, a soldier who seemed more myth than man. The coalition forces became obsessed with taking him down, but Caine always stayed one step ahead. Every encounter with him left alien commanders dead, their armies decimated, and their morale shattered. He was a one-man army, feared even by those who had never laid eyes on him. But it wasn't just his lethality that set him apart. It was his strategic mind. Cain understood warfare on a fundamental level. He knew when to strike, when to fall back, and when to create chaos among the enemy ranks. His actions didn't just win battles, they won wars. Alien generals began to abandon their posts when they heard Cain was leading the assault. Whole fleets retreated rather than face him on the ground. And every time, Cain led his team to victory, not with arrogance, but with cold, calculated precision. The flashback shifted to one of the bloodiest days in Earth's history, the Siege of Valkyra, a pivotal battle that determined the fate of humanity. The enemy had sent their largest fleet to Earth's doorstep, intending to break through the planetary defenses and finish the war. Cain had been assigned to defend a crucial outpost, the last line of defense before the invaders could land on Earth's surface. The outpost was severely outgunned. The alien invaders had brought with them towering war machines and bioengineered beasts that tore through human forces with ease. But Cain had refused to let them take one step closer to Earth. Leading a small group of soldiers, Cain had set intricate traps throughout the terrain, turning the battlefield into a deadly maze for the advancing alien army. He fought relentlessly, his every movement deliberate and lethal. When the massive alien war machines broke through the first line of defenses, Cain was there, charging straight into the heart of the chaos. In the final hours of the siege, Cain faced the alien warlord leading the assault, a monstrous figure 3 times his size, covered in armor that no weapon seemed able to pierce. Cain had no fear. He had learned long ago that fear was a luxury a soldier could not afford. The warlord mocked him, declaring the extinction of humanity was at hand. Cain didn't respond with words. He responded with action. Using the terrain to his advantage, he lured the warlord into a narrow pass, where his size became a disadvantage. With surgical precision, Cain found a weakness in the armor and delivered a fatal blow. The towering warlord collapsed, and with his death, the alien forces fell into disarray. Victory had come at a cost. Earth had won the war, but Cain had lost something of himself in the process. The endless killing, the constant battle, it had hollowed him out. He had been trained to be a weapon, and that's what he had become. But when the war was finally over, and Earth was safe, Cain made a decision that shocked his commanders. He walked away. He disappeared into the galaxy, leaving behind the life of a soldier, abandoning his title as the Ghost. He sought peace, hoping to bury the memories of the blood he had spilled in the name of survival. The flashback ended, and Cain, now the quiet bartender once again, blinked as the present came rushing back to him. He stood alone in the bar, his hands still gripping the edge of the counter. The ghosts of his past lingered, but he had learned to keep them at bay. He wasn't that soldier anymore, and he hoped never to be again. But as he thought of the alien warriors who had mocked him earlier, a small, cold voice whispered in the back of his mind, "One day, they'll find out who you are." The bar hummed with the low, fading buzz of patrons on the verge of departure. Michael Cain, though no one called him that anymore, stood behind the counter, his expression placid, but his mind still tangled in the echoes of his past. The last few alien customers lingered, their bravado having only grown stronger with each round of drinks. It was the large, four-armed alien from earlier, now drunk and belligerent, who broke the silence, stumbling up to the bar. "Hey, human!" The alien slurred, slamming a fist down on the counter. His crimson eyes were glassy but still brimming with the same arrogance. "I've got a question for you," he said, drawing out the words like they held a secret. "What's it like, serving warriors?" Cain, who had heard this same line too many times that night, glanced up from the glass he was cleaning. His gaze was steady, unbothered by the alien's towering presence. "It's just a job," he replied, his voice measured. The alien grunted, clearly unsatisfied with the response. His companions, slumped over at their table, chuckled. "Just a job," he mocked, leaning in closer. His breath was rancid, tinged with the smell of blood, wine, and decay. "That's what you call this? Humans, always so soft, always so weak." Another alien, a slimmer creature with sharp teeth, joined in from the corner. Maybe he thinks being a bartender is the hardest thing he's ever done. It jeered, causing another round of laughter from the group. Kane said nothing, his face a mask of indifference. Inside, however, the memories of his past battles simmered beneath the surface. The war had taught him many things, and one of them was patience. He knew how to endure, how to let arrogance and ignorance pass without consequence. He had learned long ago that violence wasn't always the answer. But sometimes it was unavoidable. The large alien wasn't ready to let the moment pass. He straightened to his full height, his 4 massive arms flexing as if to remind Kane of the power difference. I don't think you understand, human. I'm giving you the chance to see what a real warrior looks like up close. He reached over the bar, grabbing Kane's wrist with one of his hands and squeezing tightly. The pressure was immense, but Kane's expression didn't change. He remained calm, his eyes locked on the alien's face, reading every twitch of his muscles, every breath. The silence in the room thickened as the other patrons watched, eager to see how the human would react. Kane could feel the tension building. The old instincts, long dormant, began to stir. His mind calculated the situation in an instant, analyzing escape routes, assessing the weaknesses in the alien's stance, plotting the most efficient way to end the confrontation if necessary. He had promised himself he wouldn't go back to that life, but the war was never truly over. It lived in him, in every decision he made. Let go, Kane said quietly, his voice calm but with an edge of warning. The alien sneered. Or what, human? You'll pour me another drink? For the briefest moment, Kane considered walking away. But the decision was made for him when the alien tightened his grip, the muscles in his hand bulging with effort. A surge of pain shot through Kane's wrist, but the sensation only sharpened his focus. His eyes narrowed, and in that instant, the bartender disappeared. In his place was the soldier, the ghost of Earth, reawakening after years of quiet. With lightning speed, Kane twisted his arm in a fluid motion, breaking free of the alien's grip. Before the creature could react, Kane's hand shot forward, fingers pressing into a precise point on the alien's wrist. The alien roared in pain, stumbling back, shocked by the sudden shift in control. The room fell into a stunned silence. The remaining patrons watched, their laughter dying in their throats, as they sensed the shift in atmosphere. The bartender was no longer the passive, unassuming human they had mocked. There was something else in his eyes now, something cold and dangerous. The large alien staggered, clutching his injured wrist, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. You dare? He snarled, his 4 arms flexing in anger. I'll crush you, human! Kane stood his ground, his stance loose but ready. He didn't flinch, didn't move. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but filled with a deadly calm. You don't want to do that. The alien lunged, rage overcoming reason. But Kane had seen it all before. This was nothing new to him. He sidestepped the attack with ease, his movements almost too fast for the eye to follow. In one swift motion, he pivoted behind the alien, landing a precise blow to the back of its knee, forcing the towering creature to buckle. The alien crashed to the ground with a howl of pain, the metal floor shuddering beneath his weight. Kane stood over him, his expression unchanged, as if the entire exchange had been nothing more than routine. The other aliens, previously filled with bravado, watched in stunned silence. Their friend, the one who had boasted of his strength, now lay helpless at the feet of a human they had ridiculed moments ago. The large alien groaned, trying to push himself up, but Kane placed a boot on his back, holding him down with just enough force to keep him in place. I told you, Kane said evenly. You don't want to do that. The alien's anger melted into something else, fear. Real fear. His companions shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance evaporating as they realized the truth. This wasn't just some bartender. This was something else entirely, someone dangerous, someone they had vastly underestimated. Kane released the pressure, stepping back, allowing the alien to struggle to his feet. The creature looked at him, wide-eyed and trembling, no longer the brash warrior he had pretended to be. Without another word, the aliens backed away, their earlier bravado completely shattered. They knew better now. The bar was silent as they shuffled toward the door, casting fearful glances at Kane as they left. Kane watched them go, his expression unchanged. When the last one disappeared into the night, he turned back to the counter, picking up the glass he had been cleaning before the confrontation. He resumed polishing it, as if nothing had happened. But something had. The bar was empty now, but the quiet wasn't the same. Kane knew that word would spread. It always did. The galaxy had a way of remembering legends, no matter how hard they tried to disappear. And though he had walked away from that life, it seemed his past had a way of catching up to him. For now, the bar was peaceful again. But Kane knew it wouldn't last.